Hi, everyone, and welcome to our live chat with Kira Peikoff. Her latest release, No Time to Die, a fast-paced medical thriller with unexpected twists and turns, is receiving rave reviews. Kira, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's going to be a great set of questions, I can already tell. I wanted to remind our viewers to stop by booktrib.com after the live chat and enter to win a copy of No Time to Die. You guys need to read this. It is stellar. Um, and Kira, before we begin our questions, can you tell us a little bit about the book and a little bit about your background as well?
Sure. So I'm trained as a journalist. I have my degree in journalism from NYU, and I worked as a reporter for a number of years and also in book publishing as an editor before I started writing. The
Hmm.
book is a thriller about a young woman who has inexplicably stopped aging altogether, and scientists believe that her body may contain the key to the fountain of youth. So she gets wrapped up into a big thriller and a big struggle from there.
Excellent. Is there anything else about your background, like any research that you kind of came across that was the catalyst for writing this?
I actually saw a show on TV that was the catalyst for the idea. It was a show on, I
Hmm.
think, either TLC or the Discovery Channel about a young girl who had stopped aging as a toddler, and everybody was baffled, didn't
Wow.
understand it all. And I just
Wow.
couldn't get that story out of my head. And after actually a few years later, when I was sitting down to write a book, I kept thinking about that, and then I turned it into my own story.
That's amazing. Alice has a quick question about your previous book. She says, I loved your first book, Living Proof, as well. And she says, it reminded me of that new show on Lifetime, The Lottery. She says, have you seen it? And what do you think about a possibility of a worldwide crisis of infertility? Very interesting.
I'm not familiar with that show. I don't know if I can speak to a worldwide crisis of infertility. I guess it would depend on the cause and what was really going on in the real situation, but it sounds pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Chris has a question just about some of your writing process, and it's the age-old question: Are you a plotter or are you a pantser? So, are you a seedier pants writer?
Has a very clear answer. I am most definitely a plotter. I think about the premise of my book and then I spend probably about 6 weeks just thinking about it and plotting it out before I sit down to write page one. So by that point, I already have the whole narrative arc. I have the main characters and the basic conflicts. Even if I don't have every detail figured out, I know what the story is about and where it's going before I write.
Awesome. Um, Christina says you study bioethics at Columbia University, and she says, what drew you to that area, and how do you find the time to also write books?
That's a good question too. So I first became interested in bioethics before I even knew that that was a name of a whole field. I just knew that I was drawn to the intersection of cutting edge science and medicine that I thought was really exciting and innovative, and also what moral dilemmas those advances were raising in society. So, what should be the political response? What kind of philosophic beliefs inform our responses to those advances, and how should we implement them in society? So, ever since college, when I took a bio course, I just was interested in this and found myself gravitating towards those kinds of stories. And then only later I realized that this field was an emerging field called bioethics and that I could actually study it in a master's program. And that's why I enrolled in it at Columbia. And how do I find the time to write books? Well, I don't always find the time to do everything. I actually had to take a semester off of my coursework last semester so I could write full time because otherwise I wouldn't have met my book deadline. So I'm only now just enrolling in school again once I'm not writing at the moment.
Awesome. Sometimes you have to take some time off.
Yeah.
um, so we have a question from Kyle. He says, "Can you explain what Syndrome X is?" Which is a very important part.
Yeah, Syndrome X, that was actually my working title for No Time to Die until it got changed later on. But that refers to the real life medical mystery condition that some people have been identified to have, in which they have total complete stunted development for no known reason. So they just don't appear to age.
Wow.
And at this time, I think there's around 6 people who have been identified who don't age, and they're currently being studied on a genetic level to try to figure out why.
So, someone wants to know here, Terry, during your research, have you found just how many people in the world have been diagnosed? Is there an exact number of people?
Yeah, I know that it's at least 6 people who are in a current study right now, but the researcher who I'm in contact with, who's leading the study, says that there's also someone in Mexico City and someone in Brazil who he thinks has it, but in third world countries, it's much harder for people like this to survive and actually get treated and become identified to the more mainstream medical community. So he doesn't really know what the numbers are, but he thinks it's probably more than that.
Oh, wow. Um, that's amazing.
Yeah.
How long and how much research did you do before you wrote No Time to Die?
I wrote No Time to Die over the course of about a year and a half, and I did research ongoing as I was writing. It wasn't like just one block of work and then one block of research. As I was going, I
Hmm.
figured out, I identified questions I needed to know in the science to write the story, and then I tracked down people who could tell me the answers, and then luckily developed a correspondence with this leading scientist who helped me go through all these nitty gritty questions as I was working and helped me write. I mean, really, without him, I couldn't have written that book.
Awesome. And we know that you've also written several topics kind of on this subject for other publications. And Chris wants to know what has that experience been like? And do people, do they comment on your articles or write into you for advice relating to anything with this?
Yeah, I'm really excited to be able to do journalism as well as fiction since that was my really original love and what I studied. So I
Right.
write a medical mystery column every month for cosmopolitan.com, and I've also
Awesome.
written health and science articles for the New York Times and other publications. So I really love doing that because I get to learn from real people. I get to interview people on um, a pretty personal level and ask them, directly things that you would never normally get to ask about their lives and what they've learned and what they've done. I get to ask top doctors and researchers about their work, so it's really fascinating. And then I get to tell their stories. So um, that's been really gratifying. And I do have people writing to me after some of these articles and saying that they were really happy to see their particular disease written about, or it gave them a hope to cope with their own condition. And I find that extremely gratifying as well.
It must be exciting that you had a degree in journalism and you can kind of take that on, and be able to ask all these questions for these really high individuals in the medical field.
Yeah, it's
It's
pretty exciting.
amazing. Meredith has a question. She says, you worked at several New York City publishing houses beforehand. She wants to know, did that experience and behind the scenes look help you to get your book written and out into the world, or was it a separate venture?
It was a separate venture, but I learned so much from that experience. I didn't know anything about
Absolutely.
how book publishing worked until I actually worked in
Hmm.
it. And I saw the excruciating amount of work that goes into every single
Yeah.
book and every decision behind every single book. And I saw why books were rejected, why, even if editors wanted a book, why the house rejected it. And I started to figure out, I think, what you really need as a writer to succeed. And over
Hmm.
a couple of years that I had that experience in reading many, many manuscripts, hopefully I was able to better hone my own critical judgment and eye for what I think works in writing. And
Hmm.
I think that helped me directly. But as far as did I get published because I worked in publishing? No. I still got rejected
Right.
just like every other writer many
Exactly.
times. Yeah.
Part of the process, right?
Yeah.
um, Lisa has a question about women in your books, women characters. She says, how important is it that women are represented in your books and in the medical field in general?
I think it's very important. That's why in all of my books, I make the main character a woman. Not just because I want to represent them, but I think because I'm a woman and so I want to read about other strong women who, even stronger than me, who I admire and who I can endow with certain traits that I feel ought to be represented
Mhm.
in fiction and in the STEM fields, the science and medical fields as well. So I think there
Right.
is somewhat of a bias today that women don't or aren't as much in those fields, and I think that's obviously false, and people should realize that if they don't already, that women have every right and place in those areas.
Hmm. Beverly has a fun question here. She says, "What non-writing related activities do you like to do when you have free time?"
Um, well, that's a good question. I can tell you one non-writing related activity that I do quite often, which is I hang out with my dog, who happens to be right here. He's always at my feet or on my lap, so I'm always like taking him to the dog park or playing with him. So
Aw,
yeah, you guys want to
he's
see
curled
him?
up.
He's here.
Yes, we do.
This is my
Oh,
dog, my writing
hi.
muse. He says hello to everybody.
Oh, hi, buddy. So sweet. He's like a big teddy bear.
He is. Yeah, he's a teddy bear. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I do that. I actually I play violin in a community orchestra as well, and I do that once a week. And then I
Fantastic.
also am like really into trying different restaurants, and I live in Manhattan, so there's always an endless supply.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm a foodie as well.
Yeah.
Um, so, oh, okay, here's a question about your first book. Just in relation to the second one, Alice wants to know how long did it take you to write and publish your first book, and was the second time around any quicker?
Huh. That's a good question. It took me a year full time to write my first book. So I did something kind of unconventional. After I graduated college when I was 22, I decided to just try to write a book instead of get a job. And luckily I had parental encouragement to do so. And so that was kind of like my graduation challenge and gift from my family, was like, see if you can actually do this thing that you always wanted to do. So I did that, and
Awesome.
astonishingly somehow got it published, but that took about 5 years later to get published.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of editing and
Wow.
rewriting. Yeah. The second time was much faster. I mean, I wrote the book in around the same amount of time, but I got it published much sooner, and I had an agent already, and it required a lot less
Hmm.
rewriting and editing because I think I developed a lot more at that point.
Awesome. That's amazing. Um, Meredith says, you have done exciting stuff reporting from the White House. She says, what was that like? And what were you feeling when President Bush vetoed the federal funding for embryonic stem research?
Well, that was pretty much the impetus for my whole first book, that experience. So I was
Hmm.
an intern at a newspaper in Washington D.C., and they sent me to cover Congress. So I was there when Bush announced his veto, denying
Wow.
funding for stem cell research, and I was there watching him give the speech, and I did feel very strongly that he was making a mistake because I knew what kind of innovations lay ahead in that area of research, particularly. So it was extremely frustrating to go back to my office and have to write this totally neutral journalism article. And that's when I thought, I need to tell a bigger story here about the
Hmm.
consequences of this kind of thinking and what it will mean in a near future society if we can't pursue all valid areas of medical research. And so that's why I turned to fiction. I didn't think journalism could cut it in that story.
That's a crazy experience to see him.
Yeah.
um, Kyle says, this is interesting. What would you do if one day you just stopped aging? Would you be happy?
Well, I guess it would be, what age did I stop aging? I mean, I'd love to stop aging right now. I'm 29. I think that would be pretty great
Right.
because I haven't started
Hmm.
breaking down yet. So if I could stay 29 for like the next 100 years, I would be pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be amazing. Meredith has an interesting question about Fountain of Youth serum. She says, if scientists found a Fountain of Youth serum, what do you think the damage and benefits would be if it were to be marketed to the world's population?
Yeah, so that's one of the big questions that I address through different characters' viewpoints in No Time to Die.
Hmm.
Um, some of the challenges would be strained resources, maybe. Everybody would obviously talk about overpopulation, although I think we would have to really look at the situation and see how many people are able to afford this drug. I don't know if you're talking about like 10% of the world is going to get it versus 100%. It makes a
Mhm.
big difference. But that is something that we would have to consider. As far as benefits, well, if people aren't aging, then you suddenly have dramatically reduced health problems and costs to the economy because
Mhm.
most people today die of diseases relating to age. So, like cancer and
Right.
Alzheimer's, all of those, because the bodies are breaking down. So, if you don't have that anymore, you suddenly have a much more vigorous population that can work much longer than age 65. So in fact,
Right.
our economy could be totally boosted. We could have, in fact, an uptick in our own quality of life with more industry. So I think that there could be big benefits as well.
Mhm. Great answer. Um, so we know that you've done some kind of health sort of beauty writing just on this topic. So Beverly says, what are some non-secret scientist ways to promote longevity? Any health or beauty tips for us readers?
I mean, I wish I had some magic bullet to tell you guys that, I know the secret to longevity, but I pretty much only know as much as everyone else who is fairly
Right.
health conscious. So like for as
Mm-hmm.
far as skin, I like wear sunscreen every day. I would definitely recommend that. Um,
Yeah.
Not like smoking, not drinking excessively, and,
Right.
eating right and definitely exercising. So nothing too surprising there, but I don't know if we at this point in medical science know much more than that.
Right. Um, Mike C says, morality versus science. Where do you stand on this issue, which you touched upon a little? And has it ever affected your ability to report on a topic of the same nature?
Well, I'm not really sure what you mean by this issue, morality versus science. It's like you have to put it in a context and tell me like what is the morality and what is the science of whatever particular
Hmm.
scenario. Just two themes like that I can't really comment on. They're so big and vast that
Right.
they may not even be in conflict at all. So it really depends on what
Right.
you mean. As far as reporting, I mean, yeah, I do think it has affected my
Hmm.
reporting because I could feel really strongly about a given morality of a certain topic, like what I mentioned with stem cell research. I did my
Right.
job and I wrote a fair and balanced article, but I didn't feel that it was sufficient to address my own beliefs. So that's why I turned to
Right.
write to fiction.
Exactly. Chris has a question about reviews. She says the reviews for No Time to Die have been stellar, but there's always one person who just brings the party down. So she says, how do you deal with a bad review?
Well, first I just want to say I really appreciate everyone who's left me a positive review and who's made the time to write one somewhere on the internet. I really appreciate each and every one, and they make a big difference. So thank you.
Hmm.
For the bad reviews, which are inevitable as a writer, I think it's natural to just feel a little frustrated that some reader didn't get what you were trying to do, but you can't
Yeah.
please everybody, so you basically just have to shrug it off.
Right. You can't listen to everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, Chloe wants to know, did you face any obstacles while writing No Time to Die, whether it be the research or just getting the writing in, the deadlines?
Uh, No Time to Die was actually written on spec. I didn't have a deadline, so I didn't have that pressure, although I did have the pressure from myself to finish it. And
Mm-hmm.
the biggest obstacle I faced was really trying to track down the scientist who would tell me how I could handle that part of the story because I wasn't about to just sit there and make it up. I wanted to do a good service to the real researchers out there, and I didn't want to just completely fictionalize it because that wouldn't be fair to readers either
Right.
who are expecting a solid foundation. So I was terrified that I'd already written probably a quarter of the book before I even got in touch with somebody who could help me with this. It took a while. And I just did not know how
Mm-hmm.
I was going to deal with that otherwise. I really don't think I could have written the book. But thankfully, I did talk to who I needed to speak with and got it all figured out.
And we're
Yeah.
glad you did. Um, Sue says, do you see yourself branching out away from writing medical thrillers to writing other types of thrillers?
I definitely think that's possible. I try not to plan too far ahead in this career because it's so unpredictable. But
Right.
I think I have more books in me, and I know my next book is already finished, and it is a science-y thriller again, but nothing really to do with this one, but it does take on a science-y topic. I think I'm in the future also interested in psychological thrillers.
Ah,
So that could be something I might want to try my hand at. But I'm really interested in thrillers and the suspense genre. I'm not sure I'm ever going to, switch to writing literary fiction or something like that.
yeah, absolutely. Um, Lissa says, how close do you think scientists and doctors are to finding some kind of cure for this phenomenon which you write about?
So as I mentioned, there's a current study ongoing right now, and it's being funded by a company called Complete Genomics and also in association with UCLA. So there's a lot of big people behind it. I know that they are getting data on these girls who don't age, and they expect to have the data to analyze literally any day now. And
Wow.
then if they find some kind of common genetic mutation or cause, it will be news and we'll all hear about it. I think that could be paradigm shifting, but it's too soon to say. Whether they'll actually have these insights that can then lead to a cure. So I don't know, but one of the researchers did tell me he thinks that within the next century, we
Oh,
will be
wow.
able to find the scientific fountain of youth.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah,
You heard it here first, viewers.
pretty cool.
um, yeah, it's out of this world. Christina says, for your main character, what's the significance of age 14, and why did you choose that age for your character to stop aging?
I chose age 14 because I knew I wanted to make her stop aging at some point. Not as a
Hmm.
toddler, which is what the real life girl did, because I wanted her to be a real character with
Right.
mental cognition and everything. But I wanted to make it the toughest possible age to be stuck at so that I can maximize her own conflict for the sake of drama. And I played with it a little bit, and then I just stumbled on 14 because I figured that is the worst age ever. It's so awkward. You're like between kid and adolescent, and you just want to grow up and be taken seriously, but you're still kind of a kid. And if you were stuck at
Right.
14, it would be pretty miserable.
You mentioned before about your first working title. So how did you come to the title No Time to Die?
Titles are really difficult. I am terrible at thinking of titles, and we went through pages of titles for this book. And my mentor, the late Michael Palmer, who some of you guys have probably read, he
Hmm.
suggested No Time to Die. It was just in a list that he came up with, and my publisher loved it, so that's why we went with it.
Excellent. Someone has an interesting question about Syndrome X. Lucas says, in the case of identical twins, do you think it's possible for only one to be infected with Syndrome X?
I think it probably would be possible. I mean, I'm speaking as a non-scientist, but they don't know the
Hmm.
cause of Syndrome X. If it's genetic, then that would be impossible because identical twins
Yeah.
share the same DNA. But it could
Hmm.
also be epigenetic, meaning it could be related to the regulation of gene expression, in which case identical twins who share the same DNA may not express those genes the same way. And so if
Hmm.
they had some condition that was altered by their environment and one had it and one didn't, that could be possible.
Hmm. We have a question about writers or authors that you admire from DC. She wants to know anyone, an author, two or three or four, that you really admire.
Well, in the thriller genre in particular, I really admire Gillian Flynn. I think that what she did with Gone
Mm-hmm.
Girl was amazing. I also am a big fan of Lisa Unger, a fantastic female thriller writer who you guys should all read. Her last book, In the Blood, was awesome. I also I read Lee Child and Michael Palmer, Michael Crichton. So that's within the genre. Beyond that, I grew up with some old school influences in writing. So like I read a lot of Victor Hugo and O. Henry. I read
Yeah.
a book. I don't know if anyone remembers a book called The Scarlet Pimpernel. This is historical
Mm-hmm.
fiction set in the French Revolution, and that book in particular had a huge influence on No Time to Die. If anyone has read that book, you'll see why. Um, and I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. Um, Christina says, I saw on your Twitter that you just read Lee Child's Personal. Um, did you enjoy it, and have you read any other works by this author?
Yes, I
They're
thought he
checking
did
out
a
your Twitter.
nice, thank you. Yeah, I thought he did a great job with it. I'm just a huge fan of Jack Reacher. I'll follow him on whatever adventures that Lee creates for him, and I've read a number of them out there. So I think you guys should all definitely pick up a copy if you haven't already. He's fantastic.
Cool. So you mentioned Gillian Flynn, and we all know she's the author of Gone Girl, and there's a movie coming out, and someone has a question about No Time to Die. They think it would make the perfect movie or television series, and they want to
Cool.
know if there's any plans to option it for the big screen, and who would you want to see play the main characters?
Oh man,
That's a tough one.
that's a tough one. There's no
Yeah, it
plans
is.
as of now, but do you guys follow me on Twitter or Facebook? If I have any news, I'll post it there. So as far as who
Hmm.
will play the main characters, I haven't given it a ton of thought.
Yeah.
I have to get back to you on that one. I think I don't know. I feel
Send
like
out
when I yeah, I was just
send
gonna
out
say
a
when I
tweet if you think of it.
I'll send out a tweet as a follow up. But like when I'm visualizing the characters, I think if I start thinking
Hmm.
of actors, I get too attached to who that actor is and not enough of like making the character its own character. So I don't really like look at actor faces and like other people to get
Yeah,
inspiration. I just kind of make it create them organically from what I see in my head.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, Jesse wants to know what is the most important thing readers should leave with after reading No Time to Die?
Hopefully, the most important thing is that readers have been really entertained. That's what I want as a writer. I want to reach readers emotionally and intellectually, and overall just give them a really good time and let them step out of their lives for however long it takes to read the book and give them that enjoyable getaway. And then if readers are also stimulated to think about any issues raised in the book and think about their own perspective on aging and on medical research, then that's a great bonus too.
Excellent answer. Cynthia Blaine here has a later question, a much later note. She says, in regard to Living Proof, what was your take on the campaign for hair products with Jennifer Aniston with the Living Proof slogan? Hopefully, it helps sales of your book. I don't know what
Um,
she's talking about, but it sounds interesting.
I saw that campaign. Yeah, there's those products. They're in Sephora and like different makeup stores or hair stores. I don't think it had any effect, but if it did, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Um, Mike C says, do you think that people are meant to live forever?
No, I don't think people are meant to live forever, and that's something a lot of people have been bringing up in relation to No Time to Die. They think it's about immortality, and it's really not. It's about life extension, and there's a huge difference.
Right.
So immortality, I mean, really not being able to die, totally changes the equation of human existence. I mean, then we don't really have to pursue our own survival. We don't really have to do anything. We could just lay around and like we wouldn't die
Right.
or be motivated to continue life. So I'm not really interested in immortality because I don't think that's ever realistic or should be necessarily. I think we're always going to be mortal, but I think the question is, should we pursue radical life extension? Should we try to live 100 or 200 years versus
Hmm.
80 or 90 or 100? So that's much more realistic and more interesting for me.
Yeah. Lisa has a question. She says your second book is just as thrilling as your first. Did you feel any pressure to live up to your first novel, Living Proof?
I did when I first started writing my second book, and actually, I have a partially completed manuscript in the drawer that I just trashed, honestly, after about
Oh,
6 months because I just didn't feel like it was working, and I completely started over, and then that's when I started writing No Time to Die. So it wasn't like an easy ride to figure out how to write another book. I told my agent I thought maybe the fact that I wrote a first book was just a fluke. And she said, "Oh, no, it wasn't." And I said, "I don't know how you can be sure I can do that again." And she said, "No, you can do this," you know. So I definitely had some doubt going on, but once I got into the swing of No Time to Die, I realized it was the right idea for me, and then the writing of it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be.
yeah. Fantastic. We're glad that you stuck it out and wrote the next one.
Thank you.
So we have another question about like the publishing world, and Mike C says, "Do you think that the publishing world has changed from the short time you worked at a publishing house?" Which we know it has, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's absolutely changed. And I stopped working in publishing in 2011, so it's been a few years even for me. But
Hmm.
just in the time that um, I was there from 2009 to 2011. The iPad came out, and that changed everything with ebooks.
Yeah,
That was a game changer.
absolutely.
The whole pricing issue with Amazon arose with the courts. So
Hmm.
that's obviously changed publishing, and as we see Amazon's dominance and oftentimes some pretty aggressive tactics to get their
Hmm.
way with publishing houses, that's become a big issue. And then there's self-publishing, of course. I think today self-publishing has been validated in a way that it wasn't 5 years ago, and that those authors, some of them are making livings and being picked up by houses and getting contracts. And our editors are looking to see what authors already have built up audiences that they can then turn into massively distributed books. So when I first started, that wasn't really happening that much.
Right. It's like the way of the future is self-publishing. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, Alice wants to know, in your opinion or based off your research, why do you think society is so obsessed with staying youthful forever?
I think it's something that goes back thousands of years. The fountain of youth myth has been around, I think, as long as humans have. And I think the obsession with it is, on some level, probably related to our collective fear of death, because none of us
Hmm.
know really what's going to happen after we die. Of course, if you're religious, you have certain beliefs about the afterlife, and that would be really nice if that were true. And nobody, I mean, I don't think anybody can really substantiate that necessarily. So it's this huge looming fear that, is this all there is, or is there anything more? And if this
Yeah,
is all there is, we don't want to just vanish into oblivion afterwards. I mean, that's terrifying to actually contemplate. So then we just want to stay young.
exactly. Great
Yeah.
answer. Chloe, she wants to know, what's your next book going to be about, and are you writing another thriller?
I have just recently completed my next book. It is a
Ooh,
thriller. It's
exciting.
called Die Again Tomorrow, and it's coming
Ah.
out next fall. It's about a brand new cutting edge drug that reverses recent death.
Oh, wow,
And
that's amazing.
in the very first chapter, I'll just tell you because it doesn't really give anything away. In the very first chapter, this experimental drug is tested on a recent corpse, a young woman who's drowned, and they bring her back to
Ah.
life. But as soon as they do, they resuscitate her. She wakes up and reveals that she was actually murdered.
Oh, wow. Thank you for leaving us with that teaser. We had one of the next questions was, when's the release date? Somebody wants to know. So now we know. Next fall.
Fall
So look for
2015.
that, guys. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So look for that, guys. That's the next one from
Yeah.
Miss Kira Peikoff. I just wanted to thank you again so much for coming. We've come to the end of the questions, and it was great to have you here. It was really eye-opening to talk
Great.
with
Well,
you
thank
about
you so much. This
this.
has been fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I just want everyone to stop by Booktrib and enter to win a copy of the book. Don't miss out, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.